Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about something we see all the time, but maybe don't really think about a river. But we're not just going to look at it as a squiggle of water on a map. No, we're going to explore its entire life story, from its wild birth up in the mountains all the way to its calm final meeting with the sea. So let's just start with this one simple but kind of cool idea. What if a river has a life cycle, just like we do? A youth, a maturity, and an old age. This one thought is going to frame everything we look at today. Okay, so first, the textbook definition, right? A river is just a stream of water flowing downhill from a source to a mouth. Simple. But that definition, man, it doesn't even begin to capture the sheer power we're talking about. That journey is responsible for carving up entire mountains and creating the very landscapes we live on. So this whole life of a river, we can actually break it down into three main parts: the youthful, the mature, and the old. And you'll see, each stage has its own unique personality, a different set of features, and a really specific job to do in shaping the world. All right, let's jump right in at the beginning. The river's youth, what geologists call the upper course. Picture this, it's born high up in the mountains. And just like a teenager, it's got a ton of energy, it's moving fast, and it's making some huge, dramatic changes to everything around it. So what does a young river actually look like? Well, the key is the steep gradient, or the slope. Gravity is just yanking that water downhill with incredible force, making the flow super fast and really powerful. All this energy is focused on one primary job: erosion. This river isn't flowing around things, it's carving straight through them, creating these classic, narrow, V-shaped valleys. So how exactly does a young river carve through solid rock? I mean, it's just water, right? Well, it has this awesome toolkit with four main methods. First, you've got hydraulic action. That's just the raw, brute force of the water smashing into the banks. Then there's abrasion, which is basically the river using the rocks it's already carrying to act like sandpaper, just grinding away at the riverbed. Attrition is cool. That's when the rocks in the water all crash into each other, becoming smaller and rounder. And last, there's solution, which is a chemical process where the water itself literally dissolves certain types of rock. And all of that crazy erosive power, it creates some of the most spectacular features in nature, like waterfalls. And the recipe for a waterfall is actually pretty simple. All you really need is for a river to flow over a tough, resistant layer of rock that's sitting on top of a much softer, more easily eroded layer of rock. The cool thing is, a waterfall isn't just sitting there. It's a dynamic feature that's constantly on the move. The river carves out the soft rock underneath, creating this overhang of hard rock. Eventually, that overhang collapses under its own weight, and the waterfall takes a step backward, moving upstream. Over thousands of years, this process carves out a deep, narrow valley we call a gorge. Okay, so after that wild and crazy youth up in the mountains, our river starts to, well, mature. It enters what's called the middle course. Here, the land flattens out, the energy calms down, and the river stops carving vertically and starts widening horizontally, really finding its path. In this stage, everything changes. The slope is much gentler, so the water slows way down. The river becomes wider and deeper, and its main job is no longer just erosion, it's now focused on transporting all the rock and sediment it picked up during its youth. And as the river slows down and the valley widens, it stops flowing in a straight line. It starts to swing from side to side in these beautiful looping bends. We call these meanders. They are the absolute signature feature of a mature river. Meanders are also constantly changing. The river erodes the outer bank of the bend and deposits sediment on the inner bank, making the loop wider and wider. Eventually, the river might take a shortcut, cutting across the narrow neck of land and leaving the old loop behind as a beautiful U-shaped oxbow lake. Now, the river's main job is transportation. It has to carry all the material it eroded in the mountains, and it does this in four different ways. Some minerals are dissolved completely in the water, totally invisible. Tiny particles are suspended, floating along and making the water look muddy. Small pebbles are bounced along the bottom in a process called siltation. And the biggest rocks are simply rolled along the riverbed by the force of the water. That's traction. And so we reach the river's final stage, old age, or the lower course. Here, the land is almost completely flat. The river is wide, slow, and heavy with all the sediment it has carried on its long journey. It's approaching its final destination. And here we see the beautiful symmetry of a river's life. In its youth, its main job was erosion. tearing the land down. But in its old age, its primary job is deposition, building new land by dropping all the material it has carried for so long. And this act of building creates some of the most important landscapes for human civilization. The river drops sediment to form wide, fertile floodplains, the very cradles of agriculture. It creates its own naturally raised banks called levees, and most dramatically, when the river finally meets the sea and drops its last load of sediment, it can build huge areas of new land called deltas. Now that we understand the life of a river, let's turn to our relationship with them. Because from the dawn of civilization, rivers have been a source of both incredible life and, well, a lot of conflict for humanity. It's because rivers give us almost everything we need to build a society: water to drink and grow food, natural highways for trade, power from dams, and the fertile soil we just talked about. They are, quite literally, the foundation of civilization. But our attempts to control rivers are a real double-edged sword. Take dams, for example. On one hand, they provide reliable water, flood control, and clean energy. But on the other, they can displace entire communities, destroy ecosystems, and are incredibly expensive to build and maintain. And then there's the ever-present danger of floods. While flooding is a natural process, human activities like deforestation and urbanization can make them far more destructive. This presents a classic trade-off. Floods can be devastating, but they also deposit the fertile soil that civilizations rely on. And this is why it's no accident that the world's great cities, Paris, London, Cairo, Shanghai, all grew up on the banks of rivers. They simply provide all the essential ingredients for civilization to flourish: water, food, and transport. To really understand their scale, just remember this number: 70%. That's how much of our planet is covered by water. And rivers are the arteries of that global system, carrying life across the continents and shaping the entire world we know. And this brings us to a final critical thought. We've traced a river's life from youth to old age, but that story isn't fixed in stone. As our world warms and rainfall patterns shift, this entire cycle could be transformed. So the question we're left with is this: as our climate changes, how will the life story of our rivers change right along with it?